Hi, welcome back to the VeriDAO channel. We are continuing our series on the amicus brief that we filed recently into the SEC versus Ripple case. We just actually, in our first video, we were talking about the motivations and intentions behind filing the amicus brief. And I think we covered most of that. We did just get off the phone with Reggie Middleton. He seems to be in Dubai on a business trip, and we got to get some feedback from him on the filing of the amicus brief. He also went into giving some clarification on some of the misconceptions that the public has about the settlement that he had with the SEC. So that you'll be seeing in our next video coming out on the VeriDAO channel. We'll have a brief video about that and giving Reggie's response to the filing. That led us into conversations about peer-to-peer capital markets and how the SEC's overreach has really harmed those markets and forced innovation outside of the US, ultimately making it more difficult to do business inside the US and causing an increase in costs to do business in the US. And those then are passed on to, unfortunately, typically the American citizen who's wanting to engage in those innovations and really is leaving the United States at a disadvantage. So Trey, can you kind of talk a little bit more about those peer-to-peer capital markets and what Reggie was helping us unpack there?
Sure. It's a shame that it's come to this in the United States. We're used to leading the world economies in innovation. We've put ourselves in a disadvantage, I think, by the legislators not acting more quickly on this space and giving us a set of statutes and codes that we could go by. And I know that we talked about this in our last video. But it was really interesting. Reggie's in Dubai. I don't know what he's doing there, but he has in his possession the foundational technology for an IP for distributed ledger technology and blockchain. And at the VeriDAO, we've written in the amicus brief about who we are and how we're a diverse community. And that we're passionate about peer-to-peer capital markets and the disintermediating of the financial systems for the benefit of inventors like Reggie Middleton. So it's still not too late, I think, to get our act together and get a solid set of regulations that benefit the U.S. citizens. But Reggie's absolutely right. If you push innovation offshore, what's going to happen is the United States is still going to use that innovation, but it's going to cost more for that innovation to benefit U.S. citizens. And we all know that companies, when they pay more, their clients pay more. And in this case, the clients of DeFi and CeFi are everyday U.S. citizens. So very concerning that our legislators have not been able to act more quickly as we see innovation being pushed offshore. And let me explain for a minute, if I can, what peer-to-peer capital markets are. We did a short clip about you and I doing a deal together and exchanging value. Yeah. But, in the marketplace of ideas, in the marketplace of forming capital, what generally happens is a great idea will come to the table. And let's say that idea was cultivated by a company, and we'll just call them GS. So GS has links into the capital market system. They have the ability to form capital. And what GS is they're a rent seeker. They're an entity that creates no value for the inventor, the man or woman who invents this idea and brings it to the market, or the public itself. So what happens is a good idea comes to the table. This inventor will come to GS and say, I've got this idea. I want to take it public for the benefit of the public and to take it to market. So the inventor will go on a roadshow. They'll go to all of the friends of GS and they'll form this capital. Well, in the middle of doing all this, GS and all of their friends will take 30 to 50% of the initial value as a fee for taking that idea to market and raising the capital. So what happens to the idea? Eventually it gets to market once it goes through the initial public offering and the roadshow and ramping up the idea and doing the manufacturing and getting all the distribution set up. All of that requires an enormous amount of capital. Well, if you, Lisa, had a great idea and 50% of the capital that you raised went to the rent seekers, there's only 50% left to get the distribution market set up, to do the manufacturing, to do the marketing, and to get this idea to where it's benefiting the public. In the meantime, peer-to-peer capital markets, if that idea had been allowed to come to fruition, I think Reggie created this idea in 2013. He patented it in 2014. He defended the patents for 7 years and was awarded a Japanese and a USPTO patent in 2021, I believe. And here most recently in 2022 by the US Patent Office. I believe that's correct. In any case, he was granted the patents. Okay. So if his idea was developed and cultivated by our system since the time he patented it in 2014, and it shouldn't take that long to get a patent. I mean, you don't have to defend a patent for 7 years. There was a patent that was issued in recently for a high-tech company in Singapore, and it took 3 months for the USPTO to give that patent.
Wow.
So it wasn't necessarily because Reggie had an idea that was not original. It was absolutely original, but it just, for some reason, they stretched out his patent approval process. If we had used those 7 years it took him to defend his patent and actually put his patent in motion, let's just say we had a cure for cancer, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that would benefit the entire world.
Right.
And that cure for cancer was being brought to market in the old system. All of the time and money and resources that were sucked away by GS could have been put to use in Reggie Middleton's peer-to-peer capital markets immediately.
Right.
And that capital could have been put to work. So in my opinion, we're 7 years behind in allowing innovation to come to the table because of Reggie Middleton's innovation of peer-to-peer capital markets, which subsets of that are DeFi and CeFi, which a lot of people in the cryptocurrency space can identify with. We would be way ahead of where we are in bringing the best ideas, the best innovations to the market quicker.
Yeah, we're openly seeing statements. I mentioned in our recent interview with Reggie that I heard a speech with, I don't know that it was a speech, it may have been an interview, but Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple was saying that, they've already won as far as they're concerned because they are continuing to innovate outside the US. So Ripple is going on. It just might be that America loses out because the U.S. won't be able to use that technology, depending on how this case fleshes out and and then ultimately that affects the individuals, we the people, because then America is left behind in this technology race, and it's a race. I mean, I think that it's strategic, and the way you're talking about, I didn't realize. The difference between getting what's a typical amount of time getting a patent, I think anywhere from 3 months to 2 years typically was what I had kind of heard, versus the 7 years it took for Reggie. Well, why is that? It always makes you wonder if there's something happening behind the scenes there.
Well, my personal opinion is that he has an invention that threatens the legacy system, that threatens the power structures, what a lot of people call the powers that be, want to hold on to their power. And if an idea comes to the table that in the least way it threatens that power, then they're going to attack it. And I think Reggie has a great story to tell about being attacked for really you can't point a finger at the reason he was attacked the way he was, other than, in my opinion, that his invention is so powerful so disintermediating that it scares some people.
Yeah, definitely. That leads us right into talking about peer-to-peer capital markets and the strength that there is and how that does really move innovation forward and benefit we the people. That moves us right into our next point on the AB that was filed by the VeriDAO. Do we want to jump into that and unpack that next?
Yeah, we can jump into that. I think that's a good segue into where we need to be in unpacking the amicus brief for folks that are interested in knowing more about, our motivations and what the amicus really says. It's been my opinion for a long time that the Veritaseum token, the VERI token, which is at the center of our amicus, was a utility token that was meant to be like a Microsoft subscription. It was prepaid services for software. And the utility of the VERI token has come under assault along with the SEC's prosecution of Reggie Middleton, because he was innovating a platform that brought peer-to-peer capital markets to anybody who had VERI coins and could access a computer and get onto the Veritaseum platform. One of the things that I think that is very interesting, it's a statement that that has been made in the public most recently, and it's scroll up for a second. Since the prosecution of stop right there. Yep. Since the prosecution of Reggie Middleton, and the reason that the VeriDAO was formed is we didn't know what we held. We wanted to get some guidelines and some guidance from the SEC or from other authorities that could tell us we're acting lawfully, we're acting within the confines of the law. This is how you can use this invention to continue on with your own personal efforts and to benefit humanity in general. And, we kind of got a cream pie in the face. We got a pie in the face from every entity that we sought guidance from. So VERI Central Persons has made a public statement about the VERI token that may give it, and I accent the word may, give it future utility. And this is in our brief, as originally intended by the VERI Central Persons before the SEC's Veritaseum lawsuit. And that's to operate as a discount mechanism for the licensure of intellectual property held by Veritaseum Capital, LLC. So let me unpack that for just a second. So VERI Central Persons means Reggie Middleton, Veritaseum Inc., Veritaseum, all of the various Veritaseum entities that, they may have stripped in the settlement agreement with the SEC, they may have stripped him of the VERI tokens. I think there were 97 million VERI tokens that were stripped from Reggie Middleton. They may have said, okay, Reggie Middleton is not able to create a new digital currency or a new utility token. They may have crippled the Veritaseum platform momentarily, but what they did not touch was his intellectual property. It's the property which the Japanese Patent Office and the U.S. Patent Office has recognized as property that belongs to Reggie Middleton and can be used by him. And for that reason, I think that legally allows him to do whatever he wants with the intellectual property. And I think that in that way, he's able to go back and say, okay, listen, they damaged me and they damaged the Veritaseum token holders, but I think that there's a legal way for us to move forward here, even if it's ex-US, if it's outside of the US jurisdiction, to operate and license the intellectual property and benefit all of those who have supported Veritaseum since the beginning.
Absolutely. So when we go into the next steps of this, the IP, Reggie's IP is what is so critical, but it's separate from the DAO statement. We're just going back through. We're not re-legislating that case or any of that. That's not our intention or motivation for this.
No, we don't want to relitigate what the SEC did to Reggie Middleton and Veritaseum.
We're just having to unpack or explain that as part of our story through this.
It's relative. It's relevant because we came from somewhere and we are here for a reason. You hear in political circles that this president was did so much overreach that it gave birth to this president, or this politician came along because this politician failed so bad. It's my opinion as a U.S. citizen that the SEC has failed so badly that it's given rise to the VeriDAO. And that's not an adversarial statement. That's just a statement of fact. We wanted to act lawfully and legally, and that's kind of the reason that we came together as an entity. But the statement goes on in the amicus brief from our attorneys that even though Reggie Middleton was attacked for quote unquote defrauding the public by making statements about his patent, he was actually awarded the Japanese patent and the US patent. And we call them the 566 and the 477 now as a kind of a shorthand for the patents that were granted. And I think that it's important for people to understand what the patents actually say. And so stop right there. It says, scroll down just a little bit. It says it provides a computing device, system, and method in which a transaction, crypto payments, trading, staking between a first client device and a second client device can be processed via a transfer mechanism, which includes a decentralized digital currency. The decentralized digital currency includes a distributed ledger that enables processing the transaction between a first client device and the second client device without the need for a trusted central authority. So when you break down the technical language in there, basically it means if you have a computer and you exchange value over an unspecified amount of a distance, without the need for trusting the other party at all, without the need for a third party to get involved, without relying on a bank in order to do the transaction, then you are under the 566 and the 477 patent. That is the innovation that was patented, that was thought up in 2013, brought to the Patent Office in 2014, defended successfully, and awarded to Reggie Middleton here recently. And it even goes so far as to dig into the legacy financial systems. Right. And I'll give you a pertinent example. The banks, who are typically rent seekers who add no value to a lot of the value transactions that happen in the world, are jumping on this like it's the best thing since sliced bread. And I wish I had a better analogy, but that's all I could come up with. But basically, JP Morgan back in 2020 created a digital arm of their bank called Onyx, and Onyx was sold to Joe Lubin at the Ethereum Alliance, and did the heavy lifting of making the system cohesive and the code written so that it was immutable. And they live on the Ethereum blockchain. And basically, JP Morgan has been settling peer-to-peer with a computer on one side and a computer on the other, JP Morgan coin, since 2020. They've done billions of dollars worth of settlement in Asia. Again, ex-US, because there's so much risk in doing business in the United States, in Asia, for what is that, 2 going on 3 years now?
3 years now, yeah.
And they've done billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of settlements under Reggie Middleton's invention. Now, listen, JP Morgan is a very comprehensive, very sophisticated entity. I find it hard to believe that JP Morgan didn't know about Reggie Middleton's patent.
Due diligence. Yes, I'm sure they have lawyers in-house.
Either they didn't do it, Lisa, or they willfully ignored it. Either one is not right.
I saw an interview Reggie did recently, and he said, in any other situation, if someone brought you an invention or innovation, technology, a business idea, you would say, that's a great idea. Do you own this? Is this yours?
Exactly.
They would check to see if there were any infringements on that before they invested their money or before they put themselves or their shareholders at risk. And so to think that only in this case, they don't know about these patents that were filed, that were fought for 7 years, that obviously had some big eyes on them, just is a little hard to believe.
It's hard to stomach. It's hard to believe that these very sophisticated global entities like JP Morgan or, listen, Veritaseum Capital LLC versus Coinbase Global is right at the top of the page. Coinbase falls into the same category of, multi-billion-dollar companies with big attorney firms, in-house attorneys looking at all of the pieces and parts that go into making their business run properly, and they completely ignored the IP risk. I find that very hard to believe.
Exactly.
Very hard.
And it doesn't mean that it can't still exist or happen that way. It just means that they need to recognize and acknowledge and pay for the IP that they're using. Just like Reggie's example when we were speaking earlier about a phone has 12,000 or 13,000.
I think it was 1,200. I think it was the iPhone.
100. I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's all right. I think the iPhone has 1,200 patents associated with it.
Okay. Or 1,300 patents in the Samsung.
That's right.
But it doesn't mean that they aren't using those IP or patents from other people, but they paid them for it. They acknowledged that they
wrote a check. They said, listen, this is a great idea. Let me write you a check so we can be licensed under your patent. And
at the very least, they had a conversation about it, which I'm shocked more are not coming to the table and having a conversation and saying, this is legitimately been validated through the patent offices in Japan and the US. We are using your IP. It's patented, and let's have a conversation. What does it look like? Instead, they're just acting like he doesn't exist, Right. And it is the elephant in the room, I would say, now.
It is. There's no doubt about
finance.
It.
And like you said, not just in cryptocurrency, but in legacy finance as well is affected by this. Yeah. And data transfer outside, we talk about money so much, but it's also any transfer of value. Well, data is valuable. It even spills over into those areas. I think it's going to be really exciting to see how this all plays out.
I think that one of the biggest areas that, we do talk about money a lot because it's important to understand where your hard work's value is stored, because that's what money is. It's work and it's energy and it's stored somewhere. And, for the past 50 years, it's been stored in the petrodollar. I think that's coming to an end, and that we're going to have a new area to store value. And I don't know quite what that looks like yet. I have some ideas that I'll share with you later. But I think value is going to take on a whole new meaning. And personally, I believe that the Veritaseum IP is going to be at the center of it. So let me back up for a minute. I made a statement about there being some statements in the public about the IP and there being a discount mechanism tied to the Veritaseum token. The attorneys for the VeriDAO, scroll up a little bit. Yeah. So our attorneys went on to say, thus, while there is no right to share in any profits generated by the 566 patent by the holders of VERI tokens, there is intended to be apparent utility in holding VERI tokens, and there's presumably corresponding value in trading the same. I think it's really important for everybody to know that Reggie Middleton has made no promises about the VERI token. He's made no statements about the VERI token. The statements that he's made are about the IP and about being able to discount the IP for certain holders of digital assets. And that's just a fact. So we don't have any skin in the game. We don't have a dog in the hunt where the patents are concerned. There have been no statements made by Reggie Middleton or anybody at Veritaseum about that. But I think it is an interesting idea that the intellectual property, the foundational groundwork of the new economy, he has latitude to do whatever he wants with it.
Because the IP is his, that's separate from the token.
That's right. It's completely separate altogether. Mm-hmm. So let's go on and move down to, I guess, page 9 of 15 here in the document. I want to go ahead and give everybody a chance to review the document and kind of break it down for them, so that if there is any misconceptions about the statements made by our attorneys, we can put those to rest. Sure. For example, I know that there's some legal statements that have been made that have been twisted in the media here recently about whether Reggie Middleton was convicted or not in the his settlement with the SEC. I think he's going to address that himself. So stay tuned to the VeriDAO YouTube channel, and you can watch Reggie address that specifically. But our attorneys go on to say, in an effort to use the VERI tokens responsibly and legally, which has been our intention from the word go, members of the VeriDAO attempted to obtain more information through freedom of information requests and formal submissions of a no action letter. The latter effort involved a request of a no action letter from the SEC regarding, among other items, the use of the VERI token in their possession, the non-issuer holders for peer-to-peer digital asset transfers, and the sale and trade of VERI tokens in their possession as a non-issuer holder. What they're getting at in the non-issuer holder aspect is in the 1933 Securities Act, and I believe in several other Supreme Court cases, which are the basis of case law in the United States, that as non-issuer holders of an asset, we cannot be pursued under the same guidelines as issuers like Reggie Middleton. So there have been comments, there have been statements made by the SEC in their case against Ripple, where they've said, we're going to go after every XRP token holder, just like we do Brad Garlinghouse and Chris Larson. Well, I'm no law expert, but I can read, and that goes against everything that precedent in law in the United States has said about what the government can do and what the government can't do. What precedent has said is the government cannot go after non-issuers. And so, personally at the VeriDAO, we have been threatened by certain individuals in the government, verbally through our attorneys. And we were told that we would be in jeopardy if we handled the VERI token, which I think is a travesty of people that we hold in high regard in public institutions. So,
especially when they specifically, had every opportunity in the settlement document that when they settled with Veritaseum, with the VERI persons, central persons, they, in the allegations, they mentioned the token, but in the settlement agreement, the token was not mentioned at all. And so they had every opportunity to make a declarative statement at that point. If they wanted to give some guidance, they could have done that at that point, but they neglected to do so. And once again, it makes me wonder, I don't think that was necessarily done. It's my opinion that wasn't done, or that was possibly done on purpose.
Well, it was done on purpose so they could continue to regulate by enforcement. If they make a statement about the VERI token, then they have some constraints on their power, and they don't want constraints on their power. They want constraints on the public, but not constraints on their power. I should TM that.
Yeah.
So, moving on, our attorneys have made some really, really good analysis here. They say in the proper analysis of these two requests, it would been necessary to first determine whether the VERI tokens were indeed investment contracts or another type of security, and second, whether there was an available exemption for unaffiliated non-issuer holders. However, the SEC chose not to do that. In fact, they went the other direction. They were conspicuously ambiguous about their definitions about the VERI token, and whether they were investment contracts. And it's this link that we have with the SEC versus Ripple case that I think is critical that people take note of, because what the Ripple attorneys are saying in their motion for summary judgment is, hey, there's no investment contract. The XRP token holders and the Ripple Labs operate independently of one another. Ripple Labs have never made a statement saying that we're going to represent you in the market. Here's our contract. If you buy our token, then we will do X, Y, and Z to promote that token and increase its value. Basically, they're saying, hey, there's no investment contract. How can it be a security? Because to have a security, you first must have an investment contract. And VeriDAO supports this statement wholeheartedly. It's the reason that we did the amicus brief in the first place, is because there's no security if there's no investment contract. I can't find any investment contract anywhere in the interactions with the VERI token. And so, just based on that fact alone, door slammed, Ripple wins, case closed.
Right. Issue the summary judgment. Also, just in addition to, it was my understanding, not only no investment contract, but token holders signed something saying or agreed to, or gave some clarity. I can't remember the exact, maybe you can help me with that.
In the case of the Veritaseum token, before you were able to exchange value in the IDO, the initial distribution offering, you had to sign a terms and conditions statement that said that you realized that this was not an investment, that it was a prepaid access for software, and that basically it wasn't a security. I mean, they came out and said it wasn't a security. So everybody who handled the Veritaseum token from the IDO was well aware, or should have been well aware if they could read, that this was prepaid services for software.
For software, similar to a Microsoft license, or
exactly
purchasing
like
a
Microsoft
game online, something like that.
That's right.
A use token.
So scroll down. I just want to bring this scroll down a little bit right there. Okay. So just to be clear, at the VeriDAO, this is our home run statement. Despite the good faith efforts to obtain much needed clarity after the resolution of the actions against very central persons, the SEC refused to provide a no action letter and instead provided an informal admonition during a telephone conference that the VERI tokens would be treated as securities, and refused to comment on the application of any exemptions. If you're an attorney, and you're a securities attorney, one of the things that you study the most is the 1933 Securities Act. The 1933 Securities Act protects retail investors, non-issuers, non-brokers, non-dealers from actions against the government. And I find it really, really difficult to believe that the SEC attorneys didn't know this, but they continue to give us a hard time nonetheless. And we continue to respect the U.S. government. We continue to respect the regulators. We just believe that the regulation is in the wrong place. We don't believe that digital assets are securities. We believe, like Hinman said in his speech, his now famous speech, that Bitcoin and Ethereum are commodities and should be regulated by the CFTC. And we also believe that other digital assets should be considered commodities and regulated by a different body. We believe that the SEC is overreached here, and it's a power grab for the benefit of their own agency and the benefit of its members, and outlying law firms and entities like the Ethereum Alliance that surround their power base.
Interesting. So we go on to confirm that it was treated how we were treated. Can you go into the word admonition, or is that's some lawyer speak that I think it sounds pretty and soft when you're reading through this. If you're a lay person reading through this, you don't really understand the significance of that, or how inappropriate that was. And I wanted to see, is it
I
fair
can
to
give you a
go
very
to them?
specific example of what that admonition was. Our attorney we hired was Jeremy Hogan. He did the no action letter for us, did a fine job. He finally got on a 40-minute call with 4 attorneys from the SEC, and there was a certain attorney at the SEC that said, we disagree with everything that you've argued, even though it's supported by case law going back 100 years. We also want you to tell your clients, Mr. Hogan, that they are handling an unregistered security and they better watch out. I'm paraphrasing what they said to him, because we submitted a FOIA request to get that conversation, and lo and behold, even though the government is supposed to record every conversation that they have regarding no action letters and make that available to the public, they just can't seem to find that conversation in their system. So how convenient. So, basically our attorneys in the amicus brief say this refusal to provide clarity has frozen much of the use and trade of VERI tokens held by unaffiliated non-issuers, our base, to this date. This is also consistent with the actions referenced by Ripple in its summary judgment opposition, where others sent similar analysis to the SEC explaining why XRP was not an investment contract. So here's the meat of why we did the amicus brief in the first place. Is we're not trying to attach ourselves to the XRP token. We're trying to give Judge Torres and Judge Netburn a concrete real world example of what happens to moms and dads when the SEC goes over their stated boundaries and acts inappropriately.
And this could, and most likely would, spill over to all of the crypto community. This is
a landmark case.
It's a parallel of what happens to a token holder when the SEC overreaches and the token holder is left seeking guidance, looking for clarity, and gets no response from the people that are claimed to be, or the entity that claims to be protecting them.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
So that's the parallel.
This is a landmark case. A landmark case is something like, Howie. And Howie has been the litmus test for how our country determines whether or not a asset is a security or not. I forget when Howie was adjudicated. I think it was back in the 50s. But basically, there's lots of parts of Howie that I could unpack. I don't want to bore everybody to death. Right. But basically, I believe the SEC versus Ripple case is going to be the benchmark for how our judicial system identifies and deals with digital assets for maybe the foreseeable future. And, our feeling at the VeriDAO was we could sit on our hands and do the safe thing and just wait to see the outcome of the case and hope it goes our way. Or we could jump into the arena of ideas. We could tell our story. We could defend our positions, and we could actually make a difference in this case for we the people. And I think that's exactly what we've done.
Definitely. So I think that leads us right into the consequences of this. We've talked about the path that the VeriDAO took in seeking guidance, what the response or non-response was from the SEC. And then
frustrating.
They go into the chilling effect on market participants and how that's affected. So should we roll into part C?
Yeah, let's roll into part C, because I think that that goes nicely with what we've said about the Ripple case and against the SEC, or really it should be stated the SEC against Ripple is going to determine how digital assets are handled, who regulates them, and if they actually benefit the public or they do not benefit the public. So in our case, in the Veritaseum case and VERI token holders case, there was unjust action taken towards the issuer. And when unjust action from the government is taken against an issuer of an asset, of course, the folks that hold the asset are going to be affected. We're called the downstream holders of the asset. And so we, as our attorneys have stated here at the VeriDAO, submitted the amicus brief to provide a concrete real-world example of the chilling effects on market participants. So if we want to continue, as we said before, to push innovation offshore, to let China and Russia and the rest of the world have an unfair head start on this race, then we'll continue to act in the way that we've been acting. If we want to right our ship, if we want to protect we the people, if we want to give U.S. citizens a level playing field with the rest of the world, we need to change the way that we behave as a government. And I say we because we have elected our government. We have, in about a week, we're going to have the choice of electing Congress people and senators and judges and school board members to local elections that will write the legislation for how we treat digital assets going forward. And I think this is a key part of our amicus, which is different than everybody else's, is we're business owners, we're moms and dads, we're retirees, as I've said before, we're everyday people. I think that Judge Torres and Judge Netmer need to take a hard look at how the SEC's actions have affected us. And so, our attorneys did a fantastic job at weaving in the Digital Chamber of Commerce and the Blockchain Association in their amicus briefs. And I think that both of them did a fine job at describing the chilling effect that would happen to market participants if these actions were allowed to continue, if the motion for summary judgment did not go in favor of Ripple. But at the VeriDAO, we're the real deal. We're real life. We're 3 years beyond the settlement that Reggie Middleton had with the SEC, and we're still in limbo, even though our best efforts have been intended to produce clarity. So,
and still looking for clarity and
still looking for
guidance. We filed another FOIA, I don't know, a few weeks back, trying to get more information and guidance. And to my knowledge, we have not received any response on that either.
Yeah. So let's continue on down the brief. I think there's a couple of other important points that we probably need to get to. Ripple's basically, the attorneys are saying that we're in support of the motion for summary judgment. Ripple referenced statements made by the SEC counsel that its theory extends to every single buyer and seller of the XRP in the secondary market. Whether this is an accurate summation of the SEC's position or not, it's what they said in court. And the mere mention of this potential position underscores the crippling position that faces holders of the VERI token since the very central persons were taken down by the SEC. When people say, well, it really doesn't matter, the SEC, they're a powerful government agency, but, they're really looking out for retail token holders. They're really looking out for the best interests of the people. I think we can see by their statements and by the way that they act and by the way that they've ignored us that they're interested in becoming as powerful as possible. And I don't necessarily think that they are 100% interested in the well-being and the safety of retail holders.
Right. It sounds like an additional admonition, a public one this time. This one is on record, for them to threaten the XRP holders in the secondary market when that goes against that case law.
So I think going down, we've already talked about the investment contracts and the attributes of XRP is similar to those arguments and attributes of the VERI tokens. So we decided we wouldn't restate those arguments. I think we've kind of beat that horse as hard as we can and tried to get some clarity out to the public. The VeriDAO's limited purpose with the amicus brief is to provide a concrete, real-life example of the consequences of the SEC's ambiguous positions. And believe me, if there's ever a definition of ambiguous positions, SEC should be under that definition.
Mm-hmm.
If the VERI tokens were considered a security, which is denied, if the holders of VERI tokens were considered investors, which is denied, as an improper descriptor, the SEC's Veritaseum lawsuit against various central persons, coupled with the SEC's refusal to provide clarity to unaffiliated non-issuer holders, has caused harm to quote-unquote investors of the VERI token. So that's where we are. We are harmed parties. In legal parlance, you can only bring actions against the person or entity that you oppose if you are a harmed party.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's important that we bring up the Veritaseum Fair Fund, which is the joke of a olive branch that the SEC extended to Veritaseum token holders who were defrauded or harmed in the initial distribution offering of the VERI tokens. They put together the VERI Fair Fund and said that all of the assets that were stolen from Reggie Middleton would be returned to Veritaseum token holders over a specific period of time if there was a loss. Well, that sounds great. If the SEC's position is that that the Veritaseum token is a unregulated security, and that there was fraud in the actions taken by Veritaseum from the beginning, the big if, which I believe is a big lie, then they should make whole those harmed parties who were involved. Well, to my knowledge, it's been 3 years since the settlement with the SEC and Reggie Middleton. And the VERI Fair Fund, who holds the assets that were supposed to be returned to the people that held the Veritaseum asset, have not gotten one red cent from the SEC. They've delayed 3 times that I can count the distribution of those monies, and they continue to this day to hold those assets.
And they also
stolen assets, I should say.
Seek information and possibly use that as an information grab from those individuals, because they are asking for them to submit more and more information to then be able to be compensated. So it's always
they make a new excuse up every other month or so.
Enough information. Yeah,
it's never enough. It's never enough. And from what I understand, the SEC, if they never distribute those monies over a specific period of time, then those funds are put in a slush fund that they can access for whatever they want in the future. So,
and we're talking millions of
dollars. Millions
and millions. Yeah, it's significant. And I wonder, it's interesting to see which entities that the SEC is targeting and how that could play in as well. It'll be interesting to see over time what's done with all that.
So in my opinion, and as artfully illustrated by our attorneys, really it's the VERI token holders that have been harmed by the SEC. There's no other way to look at it. If Veritaseum was allowed to continue and the SEC had given Reggie guidance and said, okay, these are the rails you need to operate on, I'm 100% sure he would have operated to the letter of the regulator's word. However, just as the regulators have refused to give Veritaseum token holders any guidance whatsoever, I'm sure Reggie Middleton was afforded the same slap in the face by the SEC. Our attorneys go on to artfully say the Veritaseum lawsuit against very central persons, coupled with the SEC's refusal to provide clarity to unaffiliated non-issuer holders, has caused harm to investors. So if they would have given Reggie the guidance that he sought, that we sought even after the settlement, we would be leap years ahead of where we are now as far as innovation and benefit to the public.
And then they go on to say this result conflicts with the SEC's simple mission statement. Very simple mission statement: to protect investors, maintain
investors.
maintain fair and orderly and efficient markets, and facilitate capital formation. That is pretty simple, and exactly the people that they claim to be protecting, we the people, is who are harmed by this and left out without guidance.
There are over 20,000 cryptocurrencies in existence. It's amazing to me that out of the 20,000, little old Veritaseum and Reggie Middleton was singled out as the entity that was causing the most harm to the public. I wanted to say,
chose library. If you look at the technologies that they chose to target, are the ones that will disintermediate the current market makers, the current powers that be. That is who was
targeted. Who would have thought library was the big bad wolf?
Yeah.
It's incredible. 20,000 cryptocurrencies that exist. I think that what's really key here is that, we're real world living examples of how the SEC's overreach affects the public. XRP could be the next victim in the SEC's rampage on the digital asset space. And I'm just glad that they picked a fight with XRP because they have the resources to defend themselves. They have the resources to get the story out to the public and get the truth out to the public as far as what the precedent of law states and how it affects the chilling effect that it has, and what the potential downside is for everybody in the United States. It's just amazing.
And John Deaton is representing the XRP token holders, correct?
And yes, he is representing more than, I think, 100,000 or 75 or 100,000 XRP token holders. Wow. And there's a huge upswelling of support for John Deaton and his valiant attempts to tell the story of XRP token holders in the Ripple community. And John has said there are other digital assets that have a story to tell, which is paramount for the public to understand. And I think he was referencing Veritaseum, but we'll see. I'll let John.
We'll see. I believe his amicus is coming out soon.
I can't wait to read it.
So that'll be pretty exciting to see.
All right. Well, maybe this is a good place for us to break before we get into the argument.
Yeah,
I think that there's a lot of meat in the argument section. There may be some items in the argument section that we need to unpack for people that are following Veritaseum and the amicus brief. Like I said, I think that this is so important because it's going to determine either the prosperity or the poverty of our children and our children's children. And I think that it is absolutely 100% an obligatory effort for us and for others who are concerned about the future of our children's lives to get involved now. We cannot sit by idly and let the government impose its will on us. We, the people, are in charge, and they are our employees. We need to determine what the future looks like.
Yeah, this is about saving the opportunity for the American dream.
That's right.
Definitely. So we'll touch back. Thank you so much for joining me and helping me unpack this. I think it'll be really helpful to the community. Yep. Everyone can get behind this. We'll be back again for part 3, the argument.
Thank you, Lisa.